I'm looking back at this game and going, okay, um, the spread closed 7. If they play it again, the spread has to be at least 10. And so now I'm trying to look at my numbers and figuring out which team do I need to adjust. And then that's when I get going back through the schedule. And, sometimes it's like a wild goose chase or just like, Pandora's box because you move one thing and you're like, oh, wow, okay, this team is not as good as I thought. Look at that team they played in week 4. I thought this team was this, but they're really 4 points worse than that. Oh my God, what is this effect? Oh my God, this means that these teams are, and it just turns, especially early in the season, it just turns into this wild goose chase.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Matt Metcalf on the show. He is the sportsbook director at Circa Sportsbook. In this episode, we talk about his journey from sportsbook to professional sports bettor and then back to a sportsbook. He talks about how he sets the college football spreads and totals very early on Sunday mornings. And he talks about how this is different from the NFL. Matt also tells us the one thing that he would change in the sports betting world. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that gives data-driven betting information that is 3 things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. We also put together 7 Nugget Saturday, a curated list of sports betting tips and news. One of the emails that I have in the pipeline is my top 5 sports betting podcasts, so that might be another reason you want to sign up. To check it out, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for sports betting information. Once again, that's thepowerrank, all one word, .com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Matt Metcalf. He is the sportsbook director at Circa Sportsbook. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Absolutely. First, I want to say what an incredible job that you guys did with the Bet Bash conference. I was able to come out and meet you in Las Vegas in your beautiful facility at Circa, and it was awesome. So congrats on a great event, and I hope you guys end up doing it again.
Yeah, it was really just an exceptional event, organized by Spanky, obviously. We were proud and happy to host. Just the connections and the people I met during that, weekend were, just incredible from my standpoint as a bettor and as a bookmaker. I don't get out of my home office or my work office too often, so it's hard to meet people. And so being exposed to that level of just like brilliant and great people in the industry was just a once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah, hopefully not just once in a lifetime. Hopefully we'll end up doing that again. I have to admit, Matt, I was a little bit hesitant about doing the speed networking thing. It was not exactly the first thing I wanted to do when I got there. But when I saw you doing it too, I was like, oh, well, okay, we got to just do this. So
yeah, well, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you.
I was just going to say, was that one of the ways that you were able to meet new people in this industry?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny. I've talked about this a little in the past, but I tried to talk Spanky out of the speed networking event because in my head, logistically, I was just like, this is a nightmare. I'm like, we're trying to get all these people moving from one station to another. We're in a small room. Me or Spanky has never put on an event like this. I'm like, I just feel like we have a greater than 50% shot that this thing falls on its face. So whenever I kind of visualize that something is low percentage, I'm like, well, why would we expose ourselves to that kind of risk? Spanky was adamant that this was going to be the greatest way to start off the event. And so I trusted him. And then I kind of put myself as my Bet Bash attendee, put my Bet Bash attendee hat on and said, I think I should participate in this. And the more people I talk to, the more I get the sense that, bettors and people in this industry are all kind of a bunch that don't have a lot of outgoing tendencies or personality traits. And so it was important for me to kind of, break that seal or whatever on putting myself out there and talking to people. So yeah, that was my key, I think, to the whole weekend. Just getting warmed up, talking to all those people and, making connections through some of the people I met in the speed networking at other events was just crucial to me enjoying the totality of what Bet Bash was.
That's very cool. I would think personally, Matt, that like a lot of people would want to come up and meet you. Like I certainly got in line to say hello during the event because I, just wanted to meet you face to face and hopefully increase my odds that you would make this appearance on this podcast. Did you not feel more like someone that people wanted to see?
To some degree, I think I did. I never picture myself as that level of person where people want to like go out of their way to meet me. So it's a little, I'm very flattered when anybody wants to meet me. Like I think you'll find if anybody approaches me in any walk of life or like at any conference and talks, I'll probably sit down and talk to you longer than you wanted to talk to me for, because to me it's just cool to hear other people's stories, and I love to talk about sports betting and you know my time in the industry and hear about your opinions on the industry and how you've interacted with Circa Sports and I don't know everything. So to me, it's a weird feeling, but I really appreciate when anybody goes out of their way to kind of introduce themselves. And partly also because, like I said, I'm just not like that outgoing of a person. So I'm not somebody who just kind of randomly strikes up conversation. So I really appreciate when people approach me.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to have you on to exactly talk about your story and to talk about sports betting. So let's kind of go back to the beginning and how you got into the industry. You've worked both for the sports book and been a professional bettor and actually gone back and forth. So what is your story, Matt?
Yeah, I grew up in Florida. I found sports betting probably around 12 or 13 as my second form of gambling. I can remember I was riding on a bus to a field trip to like Walt Disney World or something, and there was these kids in the back, and they were rolling five dice, and they were kind of playing poker with the dice, where you try to make the best hand with the dice. And so I started playing that, and I think we were playing for quarters, and that kind of got me
Very
into
cool.
betting, where I was like, oh, this is interesting. Okay, and then I found sports betting, and eventually kind of moved up into thinking about the bookmaking side, went to college and moved to Las Vegas when I was 22 to kind of follow that dream.
Excellent. So yeah, when I was before you jumped on, I was actually reading about how the NCAA tournament was something that kind of jump started your love for sports betting. I think when you were like 12 years old, right?
Yeah, I really think the first teams that I really remember that I involved with betting are like the Arkansas teams with Corliss Williamson and the UCLA teams with Ed O'Bannon. Those are kind of where I first got into sports betting. I think the first sport I ever bet was baseball, and I was so horrifically bad at it that it got me thinking about sports betting quickly in an interesting way, because I think the first like 13 games I bet, I think I lost. And so I immediately was just like, it kind of pushed my brain to the boundary, saying like, wait, how can I pick 13 straight losing plays? I must be horrendously bad at this. I must really be missing something. And so I think it accelerated my journey kind of to where I got, which is to a point where I just didn't think sports betting profitably was possible. And so that's why I kind of pursued bookmaking and moved to Las Vegas. But then I kind of got to Las Vegas and my whole world got blown up again as I realized there were professionals out here doing this and making tons of money. So,
Right. I think for anyone to lose 13 bets in a row, that has to be poor variance. I certainly
of
remember.
course, right.
I certainly remember a 2-14 streak in college football that still sticks with me to this day. I'm glad that didn't dissuade you from getting into the industry. So you come out to Vegas after college, and then what happens then?
Yeah, so I came out here and ended up at the desk of Jay Cornegay, who at the time was at the Imperial Palace, which was really an exceptional sports book. And I had followed them from Florida kind of back in the day. There was on AOL, there was a part, I guess, keyword, and you'd type in odds and would kick up odds for probably like the top 10 Vegas books and maybe a couple offshore books. But it would also have stories that were written about Vegas sports books. And predominantly when I was reading this site, probably like from 96 to 2000 or 99, whenever AOL stopped being a thing, there was a lot of articles about Jay Cornegay and the Imperial Palace, and, how they would do all these football prop bets, primarily on the Super Bowl. And so I'd read all about that and say, I have to visit this place when I go out to Vegas. So before I even moved out here, I came out here around my 21st birthday and stayed at Mirage and spent a lot of time in the Imperial Palace Sportsbook, which was just a really cool book. And, it was very small, at least the sports book side. The race book side was kind of an amphitheater, kind of an amphitheater type thing where it had a lot of screens and tiered seating. but anyway, yeah, I just loved that book, and I kind of made up my mind, I think, on that trip that, when I graduated, I was going to try to come out here and work at the Imperial Palace. And so Jay was kind enough to return a letter I wrote him and said, if you can make it to Vegas, apply for a job. So I interviewed with him, and yeah, he hired me as a ticket writer, entry level position, and kind of worked my way up from there.
That's awesome. I mean, this is the late 90s and you're still going out of your way to handwrite a letter to Jay Kornegay?
Yeah, by the time I got to Vegas, I probably wrote the first letter probably in 2001, and I think by the time I got there, it was probably summer of 2003. But yeah, he returned my letter. I think I told Roxy Roxborough this story, but I wrote Roxy a letter and I addressed it to LVSC, not knowing at the time that he had already sold and left LVSC. And so a guy named Pete Corner wrote me back and said, Roxy's no longer with the company, but normally we don't hire people directly, with no experience. So he said, the way to do it is go work for a sports book. So that kind of pushed me to the Imperial Palace route. But I was really lucky in a sense that I knew they were putting up a lot of different props and a lot of different odds, but I met some of my best friends through that connection. And Ed Salmons was working there at the time, who to me is bar none the best odds maker in the world. And a lot of people probably don't know who he is, but just a gifted odds maker who I met. And then he introduced me to Jeff Sherman, who's also a phenomenal talent, who still to this day, they work together at the Westgate. So yeah, I think I was just in the right place at the right time.
Awesome. So both Ed and Jeff are still at the Westgate right now?
Yeah. So myself, Jay, and Ed and Jeff went over to the Westgate in 2004. It was purchased by a company called Colony Capital, and they brought us in from the outside to be kind of the 4-person management team with Jay at the lead, to run that book and kind of reinvigorate that book. Because when that book was opened in 1986, it was a big deal. It was the super book, but it had kind of fallen on, I don't want to say tough times, but it was definitely overlooked. And when Caesars had owned it, they kind of looked the other way from it and put all their kind of attention into the Caesars Palace book. And when Art Manteris left Superbook, it kind of just became kind of a forgotten sleeping giant, I would say. And so we kind of had to build that business back from the scratch. I mean, there was not a lot to work with when we got there in 2004. We didn't have a lot of clientele. They weren't offering a lot. So we took what Ed and Jay had been doing at the Imperial Palace and just ramped it up a little in terms of the limits we accepted and the size of the menu. And they're still going strong today.
Awesome. So how long were you at the Westgate?
So I was at the Westgate from 2004 till 2010, which is when I kind of made my transition to professional sports bettor.
Cool. So that first set of years that you were working with for the sports book, what do you think like the most important thing you learned during that time was?
I would say probably that you have to know what you're doing, which is a weird thing to say, I guess.
Right.
I realized really quick that most of the industry, at least in Las Vegas, was heavily relying on take a bet, look at the odds screen, see what everybody else is at, and then, make a move to market or whatever you want to say. And I think I realized that early on, I need to have a thought in my head as to where I'm going and why I'm going there. So in the early days, I would really put myself kind of on an island and challenge myself to book without using the screen. And, definitely fell on my face a lot of times, but Ed and Jay were so trusting in me to give me the opportunity to work shifts by myself, to open the book by myself on certain days where, I could book baseball and, tell myself, all right, I'm not going to look at the screen for an hour. I'm just going to book straight up and book to the faces. We didn't have the app at this time. So it was just, guys coming to the counter and, if so-and-so bet and I knew this guy was a winning player and, he normally moved the market 6 to 7 cents on a baseball side, I'd move it 6 to 7 cents. If somebody came and took it back and then they were just playing the price, I might move it back 2 cents. And I think that really ramped up my my learning curve. And I got to a place where when I took a bet, I knew what to do. And I'm not saying it was always right or wrong, but I had a thought and I had internal knowledge of where I wanted to go with the number. And, after the fact, I'd always, kind of do the aftermath and look at the screen and kind of understand the closing number and see how I was doing. But yeah, I think that really, that freedom they gave me allowed me to fall on my face a lot early and just kind of rely on what was in my head and not need somebody else or a screen telling me what to do.
Absolutely. Right. And you talked about knowing where you think that market is going. And I presume, in 2010, you leave to be a pro sports bettor, that those types of instincts really helped you then, right?
Yeah, I think I think I had decent instincts when I started the job, probably in 2003, even as a
Mm.
writer. Like I kind of my instincts were always decent, but I found that it took me probably 4 or 5 years where they were good enough to like completely trust them. I didn't I felt like I had done the job of booking for 5 years before I was like, okay, I'm in a spot where I can actually trust my opinion because it's rooted in something. And I think that in the early years I was self-aware enough to know, yeah, you have a lot of opinions, had a lot of thoughts, but you're not going to be right a lot of the time because you don't have the experience to kind of back this up. So I eventually got to a point in 2008 where my betting was doing pretty good. I felt really good about how I was booking and my overall grasp of the market. And I'd also kind of, in between this time and probably 2003 or four, I had kind of stumbled into NASCAR, which was a very niche sport at the time. And that was honestly the first thing that really made me think professional sports betting was possible for me. So yeah, it's kind of like things kind of collided in terms of me understanding that professional sports betting was possible. And then NASCAR come about, and I'm like, okay, this is possible for me. And then I kind of understood I can take this approach that I'm applying to NASCAR, and while the edges aren't as big, I can apply it to other markets, just the way I think about things. And yeah, it kind
Mhm.
of just kind of blew my mind there for the first 3 years I was out here in terms of the amount of information I was kind of absorbing and what I was learning.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you say like, you're developing your opinions over this time, like that is, I mean, that's basically saying like what if you were better, which side of a spread that you would want to be on, right? Like that's kind of independent of figuring out who the sharps are that are betting into you as a book. Is that correct?
Maybe I don't know if I ever felt like it was like that is the opinion I was talking about. I think it was just the opinion that I could look at a game, process information, and know kind of where the number should be. So I never felt like it was like, oh, I know how to pick winners now. I never felt like that. I still don't feel like that. But I had my mind was working in like the correct way in how I thought about things, and I was able to remain like objective and neutral enough when I analyzed games that I was not overreacting at any points to information, and I was thinking about things in the correct way. And that's more, I think, the approach that allowed me to be a successful sports bettor. It wasn't that magically one night I was like, oh, okay, I know how to look at an NFL game, and I think Dallas -3 is a great pick. It's never felt like that to me, and maybe in some instances of the NASCAR very early on where it was just the edges were so huge where I was like, oh, this is simple, but yeah, it's more the way like that your brain works, and how you absorb information and apply it, and how you think about the market. I think that in the end dictates whether you're successful with this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you said something interesting there because you don't think about like which side of a spread you should be on, right? You're thinking more about where that number should be and where that number should close.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And even today, when I look at a game and I'm making a number, I'm always conveying that to, oh, this number has to be at least 14. It's not like I'm saying
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
necessarily like I want to lay 13. I'm just saying, no, I know this number has to be at least 14. I haven't even gotten to the part yet where I'm analyzing it for a bet. I'm just saying like I've done this long enough and I know my ratings enough in my head of what this number, you know, should be around, and this is way light. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I really do find that the longer I have to think about um, a game or a situation, I'm better. I struggle in sports where the games are played every day. I really struggle with college basketball because I don't have time to like apply my process in the way I'm comfortable with, and so it just feels so chaotic and hectic to me. I do much better with college football where I have a week to kind of think, and bowl games are always my best because I have 3 weeks a month to concentrate on a more limited slate. I kind of got off topic to the question you asked there, but
No, I think that's fascinating. I mean, would you recommend? So, first of all, so much of this industry is like, hey, which side of this are you on? Are you over? Are you under? But maybe for the beginner, if you were talking to someone who's getting into sports betting, maybe that's not the way to think about it. Maybe you should be thinking this game has to be at least 2 touchdowns, right? I mean, maybe that is the more nuanced way that a beginner has to start thinking about things to make some headway in sports betting.
yeah, I mean, I think obviously everyone's different, and I think a key to sports betting is kind of figuring out who you are as a person, and your character, your personality traits, and finding something that kind of fits into into those traits or kind of meshes well with that. But yeah, I've always kind of found that when I first look at a game, I'll have a reaction. This is for sports that I have ratings on or that I kind of actively handicap, and I'll have just a gut reaction of, okay, I think this number should be around 14, and then I'll look at my numbers and say, okay, my numbers say this,
Mhm.
and then I'm kind of just diving in deeper. But yeah, I don't know. It's like, don't I think looking at a game, and this is what most novice bettors do. They look at a game and they decide they're just looking for the team they want to bet. They already know the team they want to bet when they approach it, and then they're just trying to hope that the number is somewhere in that ballpark so that they can play on the team they want to bet. And I think it helps, obviously, to be more objective when you look at a game and kind of just think about all the factors that would play into creating that number and where that number, the range that the number should be, and then you can kind of hone in on exactly what you think the number should be.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked a lot about kind of processing this information, this kind of slow thinking about being able to process all the information. I feel like this is a good chance for me to ask you about analytics and what role numbers play in that processing of information.
Yeah, I sometimes am not defensive, but I sometimes lack. I don't feel like I have a very analytical approach, and somebody would probably look at some of the stuff I do and say, no, that's analytical. But I definitely relate more to like older school guys. I do all my power ratings kind of by hand, and my power ratings are really from a standpoint of a bookmaker. And when you're a bookmaker, the objective is to get a number on the board. And so I started making power ratings in 2006 for college football, and these were not something that I initially made to bet. So I wanted something that I could adjust on the fly with very little information, that I could look at a box score very quickly and get the number to where about I thought it should be, and then I could use them to open a betting number. And then the professionals would kind of hone in and probably use a more analytical approach to iron out the number and get it where it should be. But I found that I think because of my ability to make a number, it's allowed me really to think well about what a number should be, and therefore created a lot of betting opportunities. And when I started making college football power ratings, I didn't expect to be betting it. I just kind of started doing it as an odds making tool. But I found that the market, especially when it opened, was what I thought was extremely inefficient. And in hindsight, I don't know if it was inefficient or maybe it was just being manipulated in a way to create value for bettors, which I think was probably often the case. So I was able to take advantage of that on Mondays and Tuesdays, and play 95% of my bets on Mondays and Tuesdays, and do pretty well betting college football for probably 6-7 years. I think in around 2013-14, I feel like my edge was much smaller than it was kind of when I started. But yeah, it was a good run there for a while.
Interesting. So your approach, I guess you would say, is less analytical. But what I find interesting is that you try to think before you even look at the market, you try to think of where the spread should be for whatever college football game, right? And then you look at what the number might be by your power ratings. And this is something that I struggle with too, because I know I should do that, but kind of as a numbers guy, I guess I kind of default to my number because that's the first thing I run, when I'm thinking about the week.
Mm-hmm.
Would you recommend more, like, just as an exercise to look through the slate, not look at all the work I do in my entire business, and kind of think about where the spread should be, where this total should be?
I do both. So, I mean, as unanalytical as my approach is, as I'm saying with the numbers, I run through the games kind of separate. Like, I basically go through and I'll tweak all my power ratings on Saturday night for, like, let's say college football, and I don't actually do the numbers, but I've made all my adjustments there, so I know the numbers are sitting in my computer whenever I plug them, and then I'll go through and I'll make my spreads without it looking at my numbers. And it's an interesting exercise to me to kind of get two lines out of my brain, which I enjoy, because they're kind of, I've made all my adjustments and power ratings, which were based on kind of the week before, but I haven't actually applied them to this week's game, so I don't really have a thought as to what those numbers are going to be, because I haven't even looked at the slate. And then once I look at the slate, I'll go through and kind of make my numbers, and then I'll start plugging the what my power ratings actually say, and then kind of compare the two. And it just gives me an opportunity to think about the games differently. And if I have a discrepancy, I'll ask myself, why is there a discrepancy? Sometimes
Right.
I'll miss something and go back. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of ways I could do this that would feel a lot less like heavy lifting, but it's the time that I spend doing this, which is probably amounts to, the better part of 8 or 9 hours between Saturday night and Sunday morning, that I really enjoy because I get to sit there and think. And, my adjustment process is very basic. I mean, for every game I go through, I look at the box score, I look at first downs, I look at yards per play, I look for turnovers. I'm just like kind of basically like, because I'm kind of on a timetable, I have to go fast. So I'm looking through that and I'm just trying to get a sense of how the game played out. I like to look at the first half score a lot and kind of see how that kind of played out and try to kind of make my number based on the first half and then kind of work the second half into it. And then if I have time, which I don't always, I'll try to go back and read the game story or the game summary. And, the thing I'm usually mostly doing is looking for injuries. But yeah, I don't know what anybody else's process is. And I'm always kind of a little, like I said, just insecure probably around my process. Cause I feel like it's so basic and I don't have a heavy math background. And there's so many people who are in sports betting now who just have such a heavy quant background that I probably am a little insecure about it. But I mean, then again, I'm just the bookie. I'm just making the numbers at this point. So, they can bet them to where they can hone them out and get them and get into where they really are. So, maybe it's better I kind of have this approach. So.
Absolutely. I presume that you also looked at where the market closed on past games and work that into your adjustment of your college football ratings as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's what I'm doing essentially. When I go through each game, I'm basically asking myself, if they played this game again, what would the number be? And this is where it comes in that I probably do so much heavy lifting that I could automate that I just don't do it. But I like doing this. Like it's week 6, I'm looking back at this game and going, okay, the spread closed 7. If they play it again, the spread has to be at least 10. And so now I'm trying to look at my numbers and figuring out which team do I need to adjust. And then that's when I get going back through the schedule. And, sometimes it's like a wild goose chase or just like, Pandora's box, because you move one thing and you're like, oh, wow, okay, this team is not as good as I thought. Look at that team they played in week 4. I thought this team was this, but they're really 4 points worse than that. Oh my God, what is this effect? Oh my God, this means that these teams are, and it just turns, especially early in the season, it just turns into this, like I said, wild goose chase. And then I can just spend hours and hours going back through it. But I don't know, it's worked for me and it allows me to kind of think about things in the correct way. And it really makes me feel connected to my power ratings. So when I'm booking games during the week, I kind of know the ceiling of how good a team could be or the floor of how bad they could be, because I've delved through these numbers so much that, when somebody makes a bet sometimes on Saturday, historically you'd think, okay, I'm taking 30,000 or 50,000 in the game on Saturday. I'm not going to make a 3-point move, but there are plenty of times and somebody will lay me 14 on a Saturday for 30,000. And I'll think about my power ratings and I'll go, yeah, if this number is not 14, then it has to be at least 17. And so I'll make a really strong move. And I'm not making that out of like fear of the number running away. I'm just more thinking like, in my numbers, I totally understand this bet, and seeing somebody else kind of confirm what I was thinking, who I respect, I'm able to step into that opinion a lot harder. So,
that's fascinating. So would you go from 14 to 17 on a Saturday?
Yeah. Well, it just depends. I mean, if the market's sitting there, we're at 14, we're waiting for a bet, and the market's gone like 15 and a half. I would say 9 out of 10 times it's going to be injury related. Normally a move like that is injury related, but not always. If I think the market's going to 17 and I don't think that I will get the bet at 16 and a half because I think the market's going to move, like I'm going to go where I think I need to go to get a bet. And if I think the number is going higher than that, I mean, if it's 9 a.m. and this is a late game and I, that's where the instincts kind of come in, where you look at it and your ratings and you're like, wow, if there's nobody willing to take the dog in this game, this could go to 17 and a half, 18. And so granted, these moves are normally made earlier in the week on Monday and Tuesday, but there are plenty of times when I've moved a number like that, on Saturday or so. But yeah, you really need to have that feel and have that odds making experience and have numbers that you kind of know cold to be able to make like crazy moves like that.
Yeah, that's very cool. So Matt, I got into this field through analytics, and I will sell all my my ability to do math and essentially like I got into the field by being able to adjust for strength of schedule, which I think is something that's very important in college football. And for many, many years I did that. And I still run those models. But what was interesting in 2020 is that I couldn't run those models anymore because the college football schedule was completely disjointed. And what I did essentially amounts to automating your process. So looking at the box score, looking at where the market's closed, and making adjustments based on that.
Hmm.
So math wise, people would call it some kind of ELO model, but it's essentially automating what you do. And in college football, I found that to be more accurate and better than the other model, which was, which is way more mathematically
Right, right.
sophisticated and adjusting for strength of schedule, which I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't irk me now. I don't remember if it irked me then. But it's just,
Well,
you have to move quick in college
right.
football, right? Like you see some results, take Georgia this year. I remember walking into the Circa Sports book in August, and you guys were on Georgia. You guys were off market in favor of Georgia against Clemson. I think Clemson at some places was a 3-point favorite. You guys were 2.5.
Hmm.
I don't even remember. I wouldn't be surprised if you closed like 1, and that was clearly like the right direction. So I'm finding in college football through my analytics that like you have to move fast on these teams, and the old way that I used to do it with adjusting for strength of schedule, it just doesn't get there fast enough. So yeah, I mean, I think what you're doing is I mean, it obviously works because you're the director of the Circa Sports book, but it's also what I'm finding works on my side as well.
Well, I think that there's definitely so first off, the thought I had when you were talking about that is I tend to be better in markets where there's less information, which is a product of the fact that I am using less information, obviously, in my approach and being not as numbers driven. But as a professional sports bettor and even as a bookmaker, I think you really have to be opinionated in in the things you know are true or that you believe to be true. And if you kind of sit there and wait for confirmation too often or too much, the market's going to leave you behind. And I found that, when I'm betting a sport like college football, where there's only 12 games, I find I've had way more success being aggressive in my adjustments. And I've gotten into this discussion before with odds makers because I would do numbers every week with a friend of mine who works at the Westgate, and you know I say that he makes a much more of like an odds maker number. To me, I look at his number and I'm like, okay, that's a very conservative adjustment. Like you're not kind of selling out towards one side. And I've just had success doing the opposite. And when I find that I'm right more than I'm wrong in the college football opinions that I have, it makes more sense to kind of be aggressive with your adjustments because that's how the market is and that's how professional bettors are, and they bet things past where you think they would, and the adjustment is usually always larger than you think it is. But to your point, also I've worked with quants and guys who are taking a purely numbers driven approach and watch them do sports like baseball, where I've had tremendous success working with them, and then seen them model college football with kind of varied results and not put a lot of stock in what they've been doing. And a lot of it is they kind of had, I guess, to base a lot of the models on previous years. And it's almost like it takes like 6 weeks or 7 weeks to really kick in. And so especially early in the season where I have my success, I find that, a more rudimentary approach probably is something that is not all bad.
I'm not surprised at all. Yeah, you have to move so fast with college football. I did want to ask you, would you move as fast in the NFL? Kind of a different league with the salary cap?
No, so that's why I don't book the NFL anymore, because I realize that I have way too much of a gambler's mindset, and I want to make adjustments towards. I want to get ahead of the sharp money when I'm booking. And in college, you can kind of do that, but in NFL, it's such a big market. You really kind of have to take the bets, and you can't be making these huge wild moves. And I remember the first year we opened Circa, I was booking NFL, and I kind of was booking it to Pinnacle's money lines, and so my whole thing was the Pinnacle money line was more efficient than the point spread, and was getting to the right number first. And so I was taking leads off the Pinnacle money line, and basically, if it made sense to me and I had seen some money, I was just going hard at it. So if they drifted up to 210 on the favorite price, and the whole market was like sitting at 3.5 or something, I would just kind of I just go to the next number and get to 4 quick or 415 or something. And I could just sense it. I'm like, I'm being way too aggressive. I know I'm writing a lot, but yeah, I just didn't like, it's really hard for me to book college and then switch to pro. And I almost compare it to when I golf. I feel like depending on the given day, I've either kind of got my iron swing down or I've got my like driver swing down. And on the days when I've hit my driver good, I feel like my irons aren't as good. And on the days when I hit my irons really good, I don't hit my driver as good. And so it kind of feels like similar to me because I'm like, when I'm booking college really good, I can't just flat out take that same tactic and move it to NFL. It just doesn't cross over. And so I have to kind of remain in one state of mind. And so I eventually kind of ceded control to Chris Bennett, who is a much better NFL bookmaker than me. So
yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I've definitely found that NFL works differently than college. It doesn't pay to be as aggressive. What about college basketball? Which approach works for you there?
College basketball was interesting to me because I started betting it probably like in 2008, 2009, making power ratings, and I had a lot of success in college football, a lot of success in NASCAR, and so my thought was that it was going to be really easy because I'm like, there's so many teams. As long as I can just kind of stay ahead of my adjustments, there's so many opportunities for the odds makers to make mistakes, which I still think is true. But first off, it just exhausted me. I mean, I was still working and I'd come home and do my adjustments, and then I'd have to bet. I was trying to bet the overnights, and had to be in work the next day at 5:30. So, I mean, just the sheer amount of games is tough to deal with. And especially early in the season, I want to have a number on every team. So I wasn't just concentrating on one conference. I was trying to do numbers on every team. But that's really what taught me that the schedule and the amount of games and the everyday grind was just tough for me. And my brain didn't like that turnaround. And the variance was a little too much for me in college basketball. And I found that CLV just didn't seem to mean a lot. I'd grab a +2 in the morning and, the game would close other side too. And I didn't feel like it really correlated directly to like my results. I felt like I was at best breaking even on the games where I was picking up 2-3 points. And I tried for a long time, and I probably grinded out some money. At one point I started playing equal units on the first half as the game because it smoothed out my variance because I was having such wild results and betting so many games that I found where I would be covering in the first half and losing the game. And I mean, this is over the course of the season. And I found that I was able to deal with the results a lot more by betting the first half and the game and kind of cutting my unit in half. But I don't know. The only real noticeable success I had was when I concentrated on one league, and I concentrated on the Ivy Leagues for like 2 years. And I knew like every player, and I was, watching every game. And I had a lot of success doing that. And I bet the Ivy League for probably 2 or 3 years with success, and then kind of just got away from it and concentrated more on NASCAR again. But it was just too hectic for me. I couldn't stand the pace of all those adjustments. And yeah, I just got overwhelmed, I guess.
No, that's really interesting. Do you do all the college basketball at Circa now?
So we opened the first number in the world for college basketball last year, and that's when I was doing that. I was booking all the college basketball. This past season, kind of the same thing happened to me, where I was being pulled in a lot of directions. I was doing some expansion stuff. We were hiring more people, and I let go of the college basketball for this season. And I didn't open the first number because I knew that I wasn't committed. And I'm like, I don't want to open first numbers here and there. And some days we're the first number and some days we're last up. And if we're going to go first, I want to try to go first every day. And so I couldn't make that commitment last season. So I kind of turned over the reins to everybody else for college basketball. But my hope is that at some point again in the near future, we're again opening that first number. But it's a lot of work. I mean, you have to stay up really late too to do it.
Yeah. It's so much work. And I want to talk a little bit more about how you do that for college football, but I want to get back to your story, right? So 2010, you go off, you're a professional sports bettor. You've talked about how you're betting NASCAR. Seems like college football was like one of your main sports, and then kind of on and off for college basketball.
Yeah. And I would never call myself a college basketball professional bettor. I wasn't good enough to make a living betting college basketball, I don't think. Outside of the limited success I had on the Ivies there for a couple of years. Yeah, I would say that primarily the ways I made money were NASCAR, college football, and then a lot of futures betting. I did do baseball. I had a buddy who was had a model who we bet probably off and on for 5 or 6 years, and baseball would be a little frustrating to me because some years we would just kill it and we'd win like 100 and something units, and then the next year we'd like lose 50 units and quit by the end of May. And it was always like that. It was like, is this going to be a good year? And it's like by the end of April, we pretty much knew whether to pack it up or to keep going. Just very interesting. And I didn't have enough input into it. I'm not a baseball person by any means. So there was really no input done by me other than bet sizing and how to bet. So
Excellent. So you have this 8-year stretch where you're a pro bettor. What
Hmm.
made you decide to come back to the sports book and Circa?
I think I think at first I really enjoyed, and I still do, the freedom of being a professional sports bettor. But I moved out here in 2003 to be a bookmaker, and my first love is definitely taking bets. I just love writing action, and I really love not having to decide, how big a bet to make and what to bet on. I love just being the person sitting back there and putting up good lines and letting other people make those decisions, and then accumulating positions based on that. It takes a lot of my anxiety out of the picture because if I get nervous, I know I just need to write more money and that'll make things better. So I guess I was
Right.
always kind of well, I guess I was always kind of looking for an opportunity to go back. I had talked to Mike Colbert at Cantor way back about a job, like I think in like 2012, and it wasn't the right fit at the time, or maybe a little earlier than that. And I was kind of always had my ears open. Um, yeah, and then this opportunity came to me. A friend recommended me, and it was just at the right time. And at the time, my wife had been kind of pushing me that direction because she said I was becoming a terrible loser, in the sense that I just didn't know how to deal with losses. Like I couldn't get my head around the fact that every year as a sports bettor, I was more knowledgeable and better at sports betting, and every year the edges seemed to be smaller, and so I
Right.
just felt like my results were not reflecting my improvements and how I was better at this, and so it got to be very frustrating, and I just wasn't taking losses well, and in that time I think I got married in 2016 or something like that, and I was just finding that I didn't like kind of how I was behaving in that essence. And I was kind of becoming
Right.
a little miserable, and so yeah, I thought it might be a good change. And in the end, like my life's goal has always been to own a sports book, and whether that's possible or not, I wanted to set myself on a course to do that. And so I kind of had two options. I was like, all right, well, I can start another type of business and try to, make enough money in this other business that eventually I could get into sports betting, or I could go directly back into sports betting and try to build a name in the industry and, hope that at some point I can parlay that success into having an equity stake or having a piece of a sports book. So I chose to go back directly to the sports book. And partly, like I said, it was just good timing. A friend of mine recommended me, and I went in and met Derek Stevens, and we just really hit it off. And he was open to kind of all the things that I was talking about, and seemed like he wanted to have a different approach than most of the books in Vegas. And yeah, just got lucky meeting the right person at the right time.
That's excellent. So I definitely understand that there are huge swings as a sports bettor. Are there fewer swings when you're running the sports book at Circa? Is it
Well, yes, because I think when you're on the house side, you have a built-in edge, and there are not as many swings. I don't think, as a bookmaker, you have so much money being fired into you that it just kind of smooths out a lot of the variance. And I'm not saying you don't have bad days, but as a sports bettor, you're going to have some really bad days, and you're going to have some bad runs, and you don't have a steady paycheck coming in. You're depending 100% on your sports betting as a livelihood. It's very stressful. I mean, I pretty much changed my entire lifestyle, from 2010, just to be able to be a sports bettor and deal with the stress that it provided me. And I'm not, to some people, it might not be as stressful of an activity, but to me, it definitely took its toll. And I had to find ways to kind of, find an outlet to deal with all that stress.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, what kind of lifestyle changes were you making?
I mean, diet, health. I sleep. I wasn't sleeping a lot when I quit my job in 2010. I was eating terribly. I was drinking a lot of soda. I was eating fast food. I wasn't working out. I overhauled my lifestyle, totally, in terms of I started getting a little more sleep. I didn't really go nuts on the sleep. I still probably was sleeping like 5 hours or 5.5 hours, but I really started. I cut out soda. I cut out alcohol at some point in there for like a year, just to kind of get a baseline. And I'm not like somebody who's going around being like I'm anti-drinking. Like I drink as much as you want, as much as makes you feel good. I just had to find like a baseline to where I could perform at the level I wanted to perform at. And so yeah, I started like seeing a naturopath and just started like working out more and doing more weights and doing more cardio, and just getting to a point where I would wake up in the morning and I would feel good, because I knew that I couldn't keep going. I couldn't keep exposing myself to as much stress as I was feeling and not feel good and healthy on top of that. And so I had to make all those changes pretty much to just keep up.
Right, as a sports bettor, would you describe your lifestyle as different now that you're back behind the counter?
the difference that I had when I went behind the counter is I prioritized um, all the things that I knew I needed to be able to do this job. Whereas in the past, I didn't. So I knew, okay, I need to go to the gym X amount of days a week. I need to eat, this meal at home, home cooked. Like in the past, I would have just said, suck it up, like stay at work. You don't need to go to the gym. Like I realized that long term, if I don't prioritize these things that kind of keep me on track, that there's no way I'm gonna be able to do this job. So I made sure that I could do that. Everybody understood that this is kind of how I have to do it. And so, the younger me or the version of me that would have taken this job 10 years ago would have, probably dropped dead in the office and been like, that's the way it's supposed to be. Like, you don't, who's going to the gym? What are you talking about? Like, yeah. So the younger version of myself definitely would have made fun of this version of myself, but whatever.
No, I think you have to take care of your health and go to the gym and have a good diet for sure. So you come to Circa Sportsbook. It sounds like your owner Derek Stevens really understands sports betting and how it fits in with everything that you guys do at the casino. And what I see that you guys are different is that you welcome the action of sharp sports bettors. Why is that? Because a lot of people don't.
So when I was betting during the late 2000s, I guess, I would, and this is before I was a professional sports bettor. I would go around Las Vegas and I would make bets on my off days or after I got off from work. And I found that I was greeted with a lot of, like, I don't want to say hostility, but just like negative reactions from bookmakers and employees that I was betting, and I also worked for a sports book. And I was totally confused by this. I didn't really understand it. I was like, I don't make a lot of money at my job. I'm spending extra time to do work to be able to make these bets and win money. And I felt like everybody resented me. And it really rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like how I was treated. I had certain operators who called my boss at the time, Jay, and said that, I shouldn't be out here betting, that they would fire me if they were him. Um,
Whoa.
yeah, and that
That's
reaction
kind of
was
wild.
common. I had multiple people kind of do that, and it just really like blew my mind. And I would get into discussions with some of the directors and stuff at the time, and didn't understand where they were coming from, and realized that and I'm not trying to say everyone was like this, but there was a certain amount of people who were, I got the sense, didn't approach sports betting in the same way that I did, and didn't think about this as like a market type thing where you have information and you bet, and there's a fair amount of money to give somebody. To me, this was always just like the way it should be and the way that I had operated. But I really had a lot of anger towards the people who didn't see sports betting in the same way that I did. And I think that probably carried over with me after I quit. And as a professional sports bettor, I ran into a lot of the issues that everybody runs into who's winning. Is you go into books and they're moving lines, or they're telling you the limit's only 200 when yesterday you bet 1,000, and just kind of being treated like you're lucky we let you bet here. You know, don't say anything, or we won't let you bet here. So I had a lot of that probably anger in me, and then at some point I kind of realized that these people are only doing this because that's how they were taught by the people who hired them, or the people before them. And I think I just, obviously I got older and matured a little, and I just kind of saw their side, and I kind of tried to be less angry about it, and tried to realize, like, if I'm going to make a change about this, it's going to have to like probably be as an operator. And that kind of played into my decision also, I think, why I started thinking about going back to the other side of the counter. But yeah, so I think I became a nicer version of myself. I met Derek, I got the job, but the whole time still kind of knowing that I wanted to institute an approach where people who were like me, who just made numbers and bet, and sometimes they won, sometimes they lost. Like, by no means am I like, Billy Walters or something. I'm a person who loses a lot of bets. And so I just didn't understand why I was encountering so much resistance, because
Right.
there were tons of things that I bet on. Like, I would speculatively just like, the wind puts up lacrosse lines, and I'm like, okay, I'll give you some action. You put up lacrosse lines. I know nothing about lacrosse, but I'll put a couple hours into it and try to bet you. And like,
Yeah.
I just thought that's how it should be. So I had a lot of ideas about how I thought a sportsbook should run, and obviously inspired by Pinnacle, like in the late 2000s. That to me was just like everything that has ever been right about sports betting. And I'll draw the line from Pinnacle when I first started experiencing it in maybe 2004 to when to win the whenever that day was, I guess in 2008, 9, when that kind of that ports bill got passed and kind of everything dried up. That version of Pinnacle was incredible, and the way you were able to utilize it as a tool for controlling your positions, for maneuvering and selling back pieces of good bets, and it was just incredible. So that was my main influence, I think. Pinnacle in the late 2000s, and my experience and running into so much kind of anti wise guy type attitude is really what generated the idea for Circa Sports, as well as me understanding that I really loved customer service at some point in like 2013 to 18. I really think what we did at Westgate, or what I tried to do at Westgate from 2003 to 2010, was a mini version of what we're doing at Circa. But I hadn't really I didn't really like have it as well thought out. And so by the time I took the job in 2018, I had really been able to sit and think about everything I wanted to do and refine it and have a set approach to like, this is how I want our customer service to be. This is how I want our limits to be. This is how I want us to treat wise guys when they have a complaint or when they complain about a limit. Like, yeah, everything was way more thought out.
That's awesome. And you have to have a boss that understands this, right?
Yeah. And I think if Derek wasn't, I think I told him all of this in the interview, and if he wasn't supportive and on board at that point, I would have never taken the job. I didn't need a job at that point. And I had already I had vowed at that point probably many times, I will never work for somebody again in my life. Like I had said those words many times. And so for me to kind of take that job, it was very scary to me. Like I had never had what I considered a real job where you're reporting to, executives and talking in meetings and stuff like that. Like it was very intimidating, and I did not know if it was a good decision or not.
And your approach to welcoming sharp action, I mean, at the end of the line, that leads to more profits and revenue, right? As opposed to like these other sports books that are cutting off sharps, not getting that information, dumping a ton of money into marketing. Like there's an argument for the bottom line for the way that you guys do stuff, right?
You said it at the end of the line. Yes, it's a long-term marathon type approach. My goal is to get the most money, to make the most money I can for Circa Sports over the course of my tenure here, not over the course of the next year. So, if Derek came to me and was like, hey, the goal is to make as much money as we can this year, then I guess there could be a world where we say, okay, well, limiting sharps is going to get us to that goal. But I don't know in what world, unless, I just don't know what world you're not trying to make the most amount of money you can as a bookmaker. And so to me, volume is what is going to drive all this in the end. If I can get to a point where I can hold 3% on wise guys, everything else is gravy. I can take on anybody. And the more we write, the more we'll win. And so I'm trying to build a long-term sustainable sports business that at the same time is good for the industry and allows me the option, if at any point, I don't want to do this anymore, I can go back in as a bettor and find a more kind of, welcoming industry and more places that are doing our approach. I think that everyone is really living in the short-term thought of sports betting, and they're trying to justify the amount of marketing they're spending. And so they want to see immediate profits. And, yes, you can hold, 20% probably in some cases, if you cut everybody with a pulse down to, $10 bets. But in the long term, that's not how you're going to make the most money. Like the volume concept is undefeated. You cannot beat the thought that the more you write, the more you will win, given you have you have to have limits in place. Obviously you can't take $10 million on, a women's college basketball game from everybody. But if you can do things the right way, take fair limits, and you're going to maximize revenue over the course of maybe like a 5 to 10 year window. But it to me is the only approach if you're thinking about the industry in long-term, metrics.
Absolutely. And that's what other people have told me as well. And I'm sure that is true. So Matt, you've expressed a lot of strong opinions on this show, which I love and appreciate. If you could change one thing in the sports betting industry, what would it be?
I think as it sits in its current state, it would be the number of betting options and kind of I don't mean betting options like menu things. I mean like the barriers to entry for smaller bookmakers to enter the market. I think that, if we could have a realistic scenario where people could start a sports book and not feel like they had to have, $300 million to $1 billion to start a book, I think it would just be a lot more healthy and a lot more, competition friendly and just better for the industry. And that's kind of like what I run into. I think there's a lot of really smart people out there and really good operators that, don't get the chance to show what they can do because a lot of the legislation in a lot of these states has priced them out or just has not even given them an opportunity to kind of like, take a stab at it. So I hope that the industry as a whole gets more friendly to smaller business and doesn't continue to draw up regulation that kind of limits the amount of operators in a state and makes it so only the big guys can play, because I think that will overall lead to a healthier industry.
So you feel like if I don't know, a state came along, let's say California, they haven't legalized everything and they wrote the right, because you don't see a lot of what I guess you're talking about, like independent books in some sense, right? Like ones that are away from corporate America. So it would just be, I don't know, less startup costs for said business to start in a state like California. Is that what would happen?
I think like a state like California, from the stuff I've read, you have to have, they're passing legislation that says you have to have 10 other states that you're operating in to have a sports book in California, on top of, a $10 million market access fee and stuff like this. And then, you have, and again, somebody could probably poke holes in some of the things I'm saying as I go on here, because I'm not the regulatory wizard. But I do know that a lot of the market access deals are being handed out to sports betting teams who control, who gets in and who doesn't, and kind of name your price to play. And it's just, I don't know. To me, it's not kind of welcoming to smaller operators who don't have as big a checkbook and can't afford to get into 5-10 states and just want to take a stab at one state. And the other thing that's really limiting the business, I think, right now, just while we're kind of on this topic, is the tech. And I don't think anybody is really completely happy with their tech platform and what they're able to kind of do and offer to the customers and how they're able to take wagers. And I've probably defended DraftKings and FanDuel and Caesars and MGM a little more recently because I understand that they're running into a lot of issues at scale that they were having trouble dealing with, in terms of they have a bet on the board and they put the limit up for $500, and it's a bad number, and they could potentially write $500,000 to that over the course of 10 minutes. And we're not in that same boat. We have 3 states, and we don't kind of run the same systems, and so we can pick up on our risk a lot quicker than they can. So I'm trying to give the big operators a little bit of benefit of doubt and say that they do want to do things better, and they don't want to be limiting players to the degree they're limiting right now. They just don't have the tech that's allowing them to kind of operate at mass scale and open up $500 limits on every prop they're taking. So I don't know. I think that it will continue to get better. And I think as we go along here, I think there will be space for smaller operators. So I'm optimistic, as much as I probably sound a little negative about it. I am long-term optimistic about the state of the industry.
Cool. So the problem with the big operators, their tech doesn't allow them to fix mistakes. Am I understanding that right?
No, it's not that they can't fix mistakes. It's just that if they set the limit for $500, they have so many more customers than we do. So we make a bad line in Circa.
Okay.
We're booking Nevada, we're booking Colorado. We're booking manually, and they're booking by feeds. So they have a bad number on a feed. They don't have people sitting there on the ready, kind of waiting to adjust numbers in the same style that we do. So they're liable to get popped for a lot of money very quickly. And then you have groups that are creating, 50, 60 accounts with them to kind of capitalize when this stuff happens. And so they have to be profitable. They can't give out $500,000 in liability on a number that's either, a mistake, or a number that's just a bad number, that they put up an assist number at 4.5. It's supposed to be 2.5. Most places would have something in place where they take a reasonable amount of money and adjust the number. I just don't think they have control manually enough to adjust this and react to wise guys in a way that allows them to still be profitable. So they're kind of caught in this situation where to minimize their risk or having to be a reasonable amount, they have to just kind of blanket cut accounts to minuscule amounts. And so I feel for them, but at the same time, I would never put something on the board that I couldn't take a fair bet to. But then again, a lot of these companies have stockholders and they have to answer to people. So we're just playing 2 different games, and we're able to kind of, cast stones at them, I guess, because, we're the small guy, we're the underdog. But I do recognize that they have big boy problems. But in no way am I trying to make excuses or justify what they're doing. I would never operate in that manner. I would sooner take the bets off the board, which is a lot of the reason why at Circa we don't have large prop menus. I'd love to have it up there that we had 100 props on, the Warriors game tonight, but I know that realistically I can't put that amount of props on the board and take a fair limit to them. And our model is based around fair limits and writing bets from everybody. And so I'm not going to do something that contradicts what we're about.
For sure. And basically because you don't have the manual team to essentially look at all those markets and make sure everything is okay, right? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pricing deal. Yeah, we need somebody who's going. If we're going to put up 100 props, we have to have made prices on 100 props. And so for this game, and maybe this is a bad example, we probably have a decent amount of props on the board for this Mavericks Warriors game. But a typical NBA game on a normal slate, we don't have the staff at this point to generate multiple props for every single game. And that part of the reason is because we think we're valuable in serving the betting world at this time in terms of large limits. And that's really where we've found our niche. And it's so much manual effort and it's how we do things to book these games at a high level and take big limits that I don't think a lot of people appreciate what a shift is like when you're booking, $50,000 limits on a college football game or $20,000 limits on college basketball, and everybody in the world is firing at you and you have no auto mover. And again, I'm not trying to play victim. I'm just saying these are the things that have made us concentrate on what we think we do best and where we bring the most value to the market at this time.
For sure. Does that approach make it harder to get into other states like Michigan, where I live?
Yeah, naturally, because our margins are a little smaller and we kind of have to go where the money is. We need to be in a place where we can write effectively, and we've gone to the markets where we haven't really written well, like Iowa. We are currently in, and we don't see a lot of traction there. Michigan, I know we want to be in, but we just haven't had the market access to get into Michigan. So there's only so many skins for us to get in, and we don't have one. I'm finding kind of. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just there's just not a license for you in Michigan.
We currently don't have a partner. There's everyone kind of paired up, and we don't currently have a market access point. So we definitely want to get into Michigan. That's Derek's home state, and I know he would be proud to operate a Circa Sports in Michigan. So that's definitely at the top of our list. But yeah, I think that at this point, I don't know if we bring as much value to the smaller better, as some of the big players do, right. Just because of our limited menu size and. But long term, I think this is just our starting out point, and this is who we are today, and this is how we can stay in business for today and make money. And long term, I'd love to, and I would say I'm working to a way where we can build something that is more in line in terms of menu offerings with the bigger operators.
Excellent. Matt, I would love to end with a couple of potentially non-sports questions. What's your favorite book?
It's weird. I don't have like favorite books. It's more just like books I read. I'm reading right now, like this is probably opening up way too much. I'm reading right now books about like kind of how to like process emotion and like let go. So I read this book called Letting Go, and I don't know who it's by, but it was kind of just like working through emotions. And then I'm reading this book right now. It's called like it's like Western. I want to say it's like Western Mind, Eastern Body, and it's kind of like. It's a little hippie-ish. It's kind of like kind of chakras meet like normal psychology. But again, it's more just trying to figure out how to like work through like emotions. And like I sometimes in this industry, I feel like, during a shift or when you're betting, like you just generate a lot of like, you don't want to be too high on the highs or too low on the lows. And I've always struggled with that. And so I'm really trying to get better at that and understand why I go to certain places I go to in terms of, thinking like, at the end of a NASCAR race, like having a vision of like, okay, all my guys are about to crash and I'll lose everything. Like I'm picturing the worst case scenario. My brain always wants to picture the worst case scenario to prepare for it. And I'm trying to get a point where I'm just can be more present. And if I do have those emotions, I can kind of process it and release it and just kind of move through it instead of kind of getting stuck in it. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I completely believe in Western mind, Eastern, I don't know about Eastern body. That doesn't sound great, but I mean, I found meditation to be, almost a necessary thing for me to deal with my life in terms of work, betting, family, And yeah, I mean, that sounds like that's the same kind of thing that you're into with that book.
Yeah, and I think I know Rufus Peabody has been talking a lot about this stuff on social kind of, and me and him have had some conversations. But I think like there's just a tendency for your mind as the more you gamble, the more you bet, to go to it just like finds the negative places very easily. At least mine does sometimes, and so I have to really
Well,
work to
yeah.
kind of I just found it has gotten worse the longer I've been in this industry, and so I have to work hard to create a positive mindset and to create a healthy mindset, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's really, I don't know what the psychology is behind it, but you always remember your bad beats, but
Hmm.
you struggle to, remember those, fortunate wins, I
Oh,
guess.
right. Those are out the window, right? As soon as they happen, you're like, oh yeah, I deserve
Exactly.
that one. Yeah.
Exactly. I just sent Rufus the book, Why Buddhism is True.
Okay.
It is a good kind of, it's like a white Western guy writing about Eastern stuff, but I found it to be a really good introduction. And last fall, when I was trying to figure out like why I did all this stuff and, what
Hmm.
was the meaning of life, that was a book that like really helped me. It really helped me kind of focus on, I guess it helped me appreciate my meditation more
Hmm.
and get a little bit more deeply into it, which definitely helps me stay calm and all that stuff. But also, yeah, it was just really good for me. It was like the right book at the right time.
Right. Which
And
always feels like it happens. I feel like I've had that so many times where I just find a book at the right time, and I've like seen it and I passed it by, and then it's like it ends up on my lap, and I end up reading it like right when I'm supposed to.
yeah, exactly. And if it's not the right book at the right time, you should just stop, right?
Right.
Like, don't read the wrong book. If you're not in, like, yeah, I can't even say that enough, right? Like, if it's not resonating with you, yeah, just
Right.
stop.
Don't
Find the
feel
right book.
obligated like you have to
Yeah,
finish it. Like
it's not school,
right.
and it shouldn't be.
All
So,
right. I'm writing that down. Why Buddhism is true.
yeah, no, it's great. It's
Okay.
fantastic.
Cool.
Um, Matt, how about your best culinary experience? You live in Las Vegas, lots of fantastic food there. What's your best culinary experience?
I will tell you my most recent culinary experience that made me happy. I was in Miami for about a week, I think last month, and there was a restaurant that I loved down there called Michael's Genuine, um, and I had like forgotten about it somehow, and I ended up going there, and I went with a friend, and it I really like when restaurants very much like portray or convey the area they're in terms of just like giving you that local flavor and the feel of the city you're in. And for anyone who goes to Miami, this restaurant Michael's Genuine is a very good representation of South Florida, and what I would say to be like kind of the South Florida that I feel like I grew up in, which is not kind of like all the club scene and all that, and it's the kind of restaurant like they have all the menu is mostly like fresh fish that they've caught, that day or the day before. And the feel of the restaurant to me just is very Florida in a good way. And I know that I open myself up to a lot of Florida jokes and being from Florida and how things are there when I say that. But yeah, if you're in Miami and you want a good representation and good food of like, how I think Florida should feel, Michael's Genuine is a great restaurant.
Awesome. I will definitely look into checking that out. What would you say a restaurant in Vegas that represents Vegas?
That's like a hard one. I know I feel like Vegas is such a weird area because you have people coming in from different places. I guess this isn't really a restaurant, but I guess Peppermill Lounge is very iconic in Vegas in
Okay.
terms of,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to call that a restaurant or not.
I drove by it when I was there for Bet Bash. So
Yeah,
I kind of have that.
it definitely has a very Vegas feel. I'm trying to think of like old. Okay, I got one. Golden Steer Steakhouse on Sahara in the Strip. That is a really good old school steakhouse that actually has good food. Because I've gone to a lot of old school steakhouses in Vegas that have terrible
Right.
food. This
Right.
one has like the foods, or excuse me, has the goods like when it comes to food, and it also has the feel of like an old school Vegas restaurant. Like they have like the Rat Pack booth and the Elvis booth, and there's pictures. It's really cool. If you haven't been there, definitely check that one out.
I will definitely check that out. Matt, if you could have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
This is like I think I've answered this question before, and I don't even remember what I said because it's like it feels like so much pressure to answer this question. I'll give you my lifelong hero, and people always make fun of me for this, but My lifelong hero has always been Steve Spurrier, who is the coach, obviously, of the Gators. And I'm basically throughout my life, I found gambling really early. And the Florida Gators, primarily in football, was the only thing that I was able to somehow separate from sports betting and could still root for. I lost all my professional allegiances. I lost the Dolphins. I lost the Heat. I lost whoever I rooted for. I was able to kind of maintain the Gators somewhat. And so I grew up and got introduced to college football probably like right around when Steve Spurrier was hired as the Gators coach in like 1990, and just loved the feeling of rooting for that team because Florida State and Miami Hurricanes were like the two teams in Florida, and nobody cared about the Gators. And I ended up going to school there later, and my parents had both gone there, so I kind of was paying attention to them. And I just liked his attitude and his approach, and I liked that they were underdogs, and I liked that he found a different way to kind of attack a system, and the system being the SEC and a very run-heavy offenses. And asked himself, how can I succeed in this league? And came in and played his own game and was never afraid to speak his mind, and just kind of won me over for life. And to this day, I still think, any listening to Steve Spurrier talk and some of the stories he tells are, to me, are just like the funniest stories ever. And he's just like, I don't know. He's just, you can tell he's very like, he's just a very like pure guy. He wakes up, he thinks about football, he goes and golfs, he goes home and sleeps, and then he does it again. Like he's just, I just like the simplicity with which he's approached his life, and as much of himself he's devoted. So I would have a lot to ask him in terms of how he thinks about career achievements and how he thinks about goal setting, and it would just be that would probably be my answer. Yeah.
No, that's cool. I think keep it simple, stupid is a good idea, and it sounds like he nailed that, right?
I think so.
Awesome. Matt Metcalf, thank you so much for your time today in coming on this podcast. Please let everyone know where they can find you online and in person.
I'm available at MMPact at Twitter, or you can email me at matt@circasports.com. If you're in the book during football season, stop by, say hello to me. I say football season because I'm in and out of the office a lot during the summer. But yeah, thanks for having me on this podcast. It was great.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And I think you might be one of the first people to offer an email address.
It's my work email. It's not my personal email. All the work email is really boring, so I'd rather read stuff from real human beings, not like other people.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I highly recommend anyone check out Circa Sportsbook. It is the most modern, beautiful, comfortable sportsbook I've ever seen, and you can make a lot of bets there too. Thanks again for coming on, Matt.
No problem.
This is Ed Fang, host of the Football Analytics Show. I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Matt Metcalf. I certainly did. I really enjoyed listening to how he thinks about the markets, and I think some of those insights can be valuable for anyone looking to make a bet. Just a reminder, you can get my data-driven sports betting email newsletter for free. Just go to thepowerrank.com. If you're new to the Football Analytics Show and like what you hear, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts. New episodes will automatically appear when they are released. Also, can I ask a favor? Can you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts? This helps me spread the word about the show. You can subscribe by searching The Football Analytics Show on Apple Podcasts. When you find the podcast, click on it. You can subscribe by pressing the subscribe button. To leave a rating and review, scroll down past the first few episodes. Thank you very much. It means a lot to me. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, your host for this podcast, The Football Analytics Show, and I will talk to you again soon.